Three Lives, Three Worlds. The Pillow Book. Lower volume. Original work by Tanki Gongzi. English translation, Hamster 428. English editing, Rock Harlequin, Lily, Joanna Kuang. Part 4, The Shadow's Souls. Chapter 14. Fleeting days of spring were mentioned in immortal verse as follows: intoxicated by birds and blooms, wakened to find spring gone too soon. When Fengju first heard this poem from her scholarly father, it had made a rare show of her literary understanding. Mortals lament the ephemerality of spring, for it is the best time out of the 4 seasons. Enamored by beautiful things, people often did not feel the passage of time. By the time they turned back to look, what had passed would always seem too short. When she said these words, her father was made to feel that he had met a kindred spirit. A special assurance was found in his eyes when he looked at her. Lord Zai's left the estate today. Feeling somewhat melancholic as she watched his retreating figure, Fengju thought of this poem. Spring was gone by the time she woke up. Although the time she and Zai spent together wasn't quite that short, 1 week was indeed fleeting, like a drunken spring. She had wanted Zai to stay a little longer, but that would be cruel to Mo Xiao. Mo Xiao sent a long letter yesterday to Zai which she accidentally saw. Pitifully, he said he had worked on the magical instrument to the final stage. But being such a sublime object, it would be extremely dangerous upon completion. If it wasn't managed well, it might even backfire after all the energy and effort that went into making it. The situation was urgent. He requested for his lordship to return to the shrine as soon as possible. At the end of the letter, he didn't forget to ask in grievances that he had sent a total of 11 long letters to his lordship a few days ago. Did his lordship not receive them yet, or did he use them to light the candles? At this time, she called to mind that for the past few nights, the candles seemed to have a wafting scent of ink. She couldn't help but feel a little sorry for Mo Xiao. Out of compassion and righteousness, she let Zai leave the estate the next day. It was a bit unfortunate that Zai had left. Spending the past few days with him had made everything in the imperial city so much more interesting than they had been before. For example, Zai had taken her fishing. In all honesty, she wasn't very interested in this fishing business. At first, she had only wanted to humor him. But once she gave it a try, it seemed quite exciting. Zai prepared a simple boat, on the bow of which rested a small stove and a bottle each of oil, salt, paste, and vinegar. He took her downstream to enjoy the spectacular spring in the suburbs. They moored the boat near noon. While he fished, she warmed the wine. When he caught something, she cleaned it and made a sumptuous feast. After lunch, he drifted the boat into a nearby pond. In the lotus's shade, he read as she lay in his arms dozing away. Sunlight filtered through the lotus leaves, sprinkling iridescent light onto her face while she buried her head into his chest. He had a habit of unconsciously stroking her soft hair while he read. In the past, when she was a little fox at Taichan Palace, Dong Hua Daijun had also loved to play with her fur this way. She was a pet then and felt quite at ease and comfortable. Zai's present action somehow gave her a sense of intimacy in addition to comfort. She surmised they must have been connected at hearts, and marveled at how amazing connected hearts could be. Because Zai didn't care much for other people's idle talks, when he took her fishing, viewing flowers, or watching street performances, he did everything openly. Since he never thought to go incognito, they eventually ran into acquaintances who recognized them. An aristocratic couple out and about on a spring excursion wasn't a strange sight for the Biennials. However, while other couples paraded around, the two of them were indeed different, with their traipsing all over town on foot. In only a few days, the romantic story between the former archmage and his princess bride spread across the capital. When Fengju visited the palace to offer her respects, the queen's regard of her was visibly different. Fengju didn't really care how this matter was passing around the palace. She just vaguely sensed Chen Ye mustn't be allowed to find out. As was said in a mortal proverb, Fengju believed she was eyeing what was in the pot while already eating from the bowl. It was really deplorable. But as she already made a promise to Mo Xiao, she could only keep on being a good lowlife despite her guilt. How to be a good lowlife, you ask? Although it was never taught by the scholars, fortunately, the third Prince of Heaven was available for reference guidance. Chen Yi's invitation came in the afternoon on the third day. When her old steward delivered it, Fengju had just awakened from a nap and was a little confused. In Mo Xiao's story, Chen Ye didn't seem to have taken the initiative to invite Aranya to Mengchun Manor, did he? Or perhaps Chen Ye did invite her, but Mo Xiao didn't know about it or had forgotten to mention it to her. She put away this question, and with a calmed mind, came over to Mengchun Manor. She wound around the miniature stone forest and up to Boxen Pavilion. There was no one inside the pavilion. On the empty stone table was a single glass bottle. The hazy afternoon sun shone down, tinging the turbulent silver smoke inside the bottle with a layer of gold. There seemed to be a force field inside the bottle, for the turbulent fog could not escape from it. Curious, Fengju reached out to touch the object. A biting chill immediately shot to her head. She shuddered and wanted to pull back, but the bottle seemed to have been glued to her hand. Fengju was a little taken aback. For the time being, she only kept her eyes on it and did not pay attention to surrounding movements, not until a voice ahead reminded her, "Does it perhaps feel familiar?" Fengju raised her head to meet the deep and placid eyes of a man in black. Chen Ye. It did feel a little familiar. That was because this bottle was somewhat similar to the cricket jar she once had as a child. But she vaguely sensed that Chen Ye wasn't asking her about this. She noted that when Chen Ye lifted his sleeve and drew a spell, the force field inside the glass bottle instantly vanished without a trace. Thunder and wind started to wail in the distance like demonic cries. In an instant, the clear yonder was overcast with dreary clouds. Lightning tore across the grey sky as the sun hid away, swapping for a crippled white moon, its light bewitching. Unlike the eerie sky, in the bottle, a warm and soft pearly mist gradually subsided the surges. Like strands of cloud, they wound around Fengju's fingertips, each thread at a time. Chill began to seep into her finger bones. This sort of ominous scene could only be caused by a demon's being vanquished or by someone's usage of sacrilegious sorcery. She suppressed the rising dizziness in her head and looked to Chen Ye. What kind of magic is this? The black-robed archmage fixedly watched the white mist as it seeped into her body and lightly replied, "Have you perhaps heard that earth fairies who have passed away can also recreate their souls using the jack-o'-lantern or some other methods as the mortals do?" He paused for a moment, then looked at her and continued, "Even if the soul was burned to ashes, even if the jack-o'-lantern from heaven couldn't be used, I was told that creating this world not only could take us back to the beginning, it could also construct another soul for the deceased just as the jack-o'-lantern can. Fengju contemplated on this. She had a hazy impression that at one point she had also seemed to suspect that this place was created by Chen Yat. But why did she drop her suspicion in the end? She couldn't remember no matter how hard she tried to think. Now that he openly admitted to it, she wasn't as horrified as she thought she would be. At first, she felt a little guilty for putting on a charade with Su Moi. Little did they know, Chen Ye had also been acting. A single ray of cognizance remained in her mind. She knew she should at least put on a look of shock and ignorance to prove she was really the Aranya Chen Ye had personally made in this world. It appeared also that he wasn't at all suspicious of her. Her vision was already beginning to blur. She clenched her lips as she heard him. What was wrong will still be wrong. I never wanted to deceive you and start over again, but whatever the case may be, you have to come back. It's fine if you hate me, it's fine if you regard me as a stranger, anything would be a result. I've waited 230 years for this day. Each of his spoken word rendered his face a little paler, as though every word gave him pain, a stark contrast of his voice which was full of iciness. By the time the silvery soul fully entered Fengju's body, she could only sense a vast blackness in front of her. One last line floated into her ears, seemingly from another world. They say this place was made from your phantom mind. Only I know, you never had any phantom mind. It is I with the phantom mind. Fengju never knew falling into a deep sleep would be such a painful experience. Fainting was supposed to be good for the reason that she should be insentient. And indeed, she didn't have any sensation in her body right now, but for some reason there still remained some awareness. In her mind, she was helplessly watching her soul fight with another soul. This was definitely a weird experience for anyone going through it. Fengju didn't really react at first. She just watched the show on the sideline. All she knew was that the two forces in front of her were entangling more and more intensely, going as far as trying to devour each other. By the time she began to feel pain in her head, she had found the two souls battling each other before her eyes. She felt surprisingly useless lately. She had no way to stop the two souls from fighting. Standing by in pain was difficult enough. When her fingers were stuck to the glass bottle a while ago, she hadn't any strength to fight back either. It was very strange. Her head hurt as though there were 180 big gongs pounding inside it. Fengju suppressed her pain and thought in distraction. She had just thought of something when she suddenly found her soul strengthening and swallowing up Aranya's soul. As Aranya's soul was succumbing, dense feathery snow all of a sudden came down from the sky. In a flash, the snow turned into a tall looking glass in front of her. She didn't have a great memory, and again, raised her hand toward it. When her fingertips touched the glass surface, a strong force abruptly pulled her inside. Yet to find her footing, a stretch of memory came surging at her. It wasn't hers, but that of Aranya's. Inside this bizarre mirror was Aranya's life. Aranya's thoughts, Aranya's joy and grief. In an instant she actually felt them all. That part of the past was like a revolving lantern, spinning fragments of her life in an endless merry-go-round. With each revolution, however, emerged a different landscape. Fengju was curious. Did her soul make Aranya a part of her after consuming Aranya's soul? Could Aranya be resurrected as Chen Ye said? Then, if Aranya was resurrected, what would happen to herself? This was an existential problem. After thinking for a moment, she found that this tedious problem could still be mulled over after she woke up. She shouldn't waste her time on it for now. There was another important matter that needed her urgent attending to. As she decided on this, she immediately cast aside her question. In an uplifted mood, she directed her entire concern to the one important thing she recently discovered: how did Chen Ye and Aranya's tale unfold after the scare of the Quanyin beast in the stone maze behind Qinan Mountain? She worked away at recalling these memories. As she pieced the numerous fragments together, she was able to see a few true occurrences. They belonged to the 2 years Mo Xiao said he was unsure of. Fengju was pleased at her own good guess of those mysterious 2 years. Chen Ye and Aranya did in fact have a love story. Since it was Aranya's memory, her feelings toward Chen Ye were unquestionably clear. On the other hand, Fengju reckoned since Aranya didn't see Chen Ye's feelings very clearly back then, Fengju naturally didn't get to see them very clearly now. The third prince of heaven had a famous saying, "Look at the love to see the lover." For example, there was the passionate kind of love, the steady kind of love, and also the courteous kind of love. There were people who loved very much but said very little. Then there were people who loved very much and said just as much. One could not say that someone else's feelings weren't love just because his love was different from one's own. She had always admired the third prince for being an expert in love affairs. If he had personally said them, then they were naturally good advices. She used this good advice to test on Aranya and Chen Ye. She thought that in the past 2 years, despite his unfriendly demeanor to Aranya, despite his unconcerned words, perhaps he was the kind of man who loved very much but said very little. His love was exactly the courteous kind of love. The memories of these 2 years were too paltry, too lazy to sift through for them. Fengju randomly chose to skip to a day toward the end. She gazed into the glass and saw a pavilion. Inside it was a stone table. Laid on top was a bouquet of flowers whose name she did not know. A wide vase stood beside it. Chen Ye sat by the stone table with a book in his hand. 2 years of house arrest had made him colder and more reserved. He was focused on his book, turning its pages from time to time. Aranya sat next to him. She was concentrated on fiddling with the bouquet on the table. Sometimes she would enthusiastically place the cut stems into the vase and examine them. Other times she would place them in front of Chen Ye and let him see whether she had trimmed them well or not, whether they needed more trimming or not. Again and again like that, Chen Ye raised his eyes from his book and blankly asked her, "Are you sitting next to me to deliberately disturb my reading?" Aranya pretended to poke at his chin with the flower stem in her hand. "What fun is there to read alone? I'm here to keep you company." She laughed. "Isn't it because you don't want to leave me for even a moment, Your Excellency?" Chen Ye tilted his head and reluctantly picked at a few cumbersome leaves with his fingers. "Your knack for making up stories is getting increasingly better. The stem is a bit long here, there are also too many leaves." Aranya smiled in easiness. "Your Excellency, you flatter me. This humble woman is only good at reading your mind." Chen Ye intercepted the pruning scissors from her hand. His own hand shook as he said, "If you call me Your Excellency and yourself humble woman one more time, I'm going to toss you out." Arania softly smiled. Your Excellency, you always said you'd throw this humble woman out, but you've never done it, have you? When she held the flower stem, its blossoms blocked the hair by her ear. His eyes lingered on her profile for a length of time. She pretended to not notice and placed the last stem of the bouquet into the vase. That was when she heard him say in a low voice, "Turn around." She turned back to look at him, her eyes were still smiling. That was only a joke. Don't be angry and throw me out. He did not speak. He stood up and plucked a small flower from the vase, then slightly bent down and slid it into her hair. He softly caressed her temple, then stopped and pulled away. He picked his book up again, his eyes back onto its pages. In the silence, another page was turned. She froze for a moment. She touched the flower blossom above her ear and softly said at length, "I sometimes feel that it isn't enough. Then I sometimes feel it's already great with you being this way." He raised his gaze again from the pages of his book. "What isn't enough?" he asked in seeming uncertainly. But she just smiled and shook her head. Dawn rays dyed the small pavilion a color of warmth. Sky and water glided on ceaselessly. The azure pond glistened softly in the morning light. Bursts of lotus fragrance wafted in the air. The couple in the pavilion in the memory slowly faded away, leaving only a pale silhouette in the vast landscape. This silhouette was stirring and even somewhat pitiful to Fengju. It would have been great if their tale could forever suspend at this moment in time. But what comes will always come. Mo Shao had told her that the records in history books pertaining to what happened after those 2 years consisted of but a scarce few words. It was nothing short of tragic. In Fengju's opinion, there were always times when history books weren't reliable. Nonetheless, when subsequent memories merrily emerged, she was surprised to find that history records relating to King Xiongli Qiu's death were actually reliable, as rare as that was. On the evening of July 16, from the palace came the news that the king had passed away from illness. His Majesty had always been hearty and hale. It was uncertain what rare affliction it was, she only knew they said he died, and so he did. Arania was playing chess with Chen Yet at the time the news arrived. Her stone fell onto the chessboard with a clack, bringing the game into chaos. Chen Ye held a white stone wordlessly in his hand. A servant hastily took a night cloak and draped it over Arania's wrist. She briskly walked out. As she crossed the doorstep, she turned her head and said, "That stone just now doesn't count. Keep the game the way it is. We'll determine the winner on another day." Chen Ye raised his voice, "Wait." He rose and picked a white flower from the vase, walked over to her, removed the jade hairpin by her ear and slid the flower onto her hair. His fingers briefly caressed her temple before he stopped and told her, "Go." 3 days later, Arania leisurely returned home. Everything at the estate remained the same aside from the fact that the archmage who had been guesting at Mengchun Manor for the past 2 years was said to have been welcomed back to Qinan Palace not long ago. The old steward wiped the perspiration from his forehead and reported to her that he was about to send someone to the palace to bring her the news, not knowing she would be coming back. The archmage had only left a few moments ago and probably hadn't gone too far. The implication was that if the princess wanted to say goodbye to His Excellency, there was still time. It wasn't exactly proper to chase after him with Arania's status. Her steward was carried away with anxiousness, but she was altogether very sober. There was only a brief moment when she was lost in thought. She slid her cloak off, then removed the withering flower from her hair. She sat for a while in the evening wind. Blown away by the current, the petals lay like blemishes on the pristine floor. She stared at the bare stalk in her hand and smiled sadly. "Did you give this to me that night to say goodbye? I never even knew." Each ruler has his set of vassals. Different kings in power have different arrangements. The shrine's clout had always been independent from the crown. Even Xiongli Ke had had a difficult time suppressing the Archmage-less shrine when he was still on the throne, much less someone without a strong foundation like Xiongli He. This was why Chen Ye was ushered back to Qinan Palace. Even though she was a sovereign herself, Fengju didn't really understand these considerations regarding Xiongli He. Ever since she could remember, her home King Kaihu had only changed rulers once. It was when she took over her aunt's position. She remembered that ever since her aunt stepped down from her post, she began to live each day happily, and always looked at her with the sympathy of someone who had been there before. Furthermore, courtiers from the Eastland were mostly uneducated. Their biggest hobby was pretending to be commoners and setting up stalls at the market. If they ever had any contention, it was because someone had taken someone else's stall. According to them, King Kaihu was a fairy kingdom. Although they held government posts and wielded some power, how could they behave like the humans and let power blind them? Although the deities on Zhukongtian also fought over positions like this, it was all because they didn't have any purpose in life. They hadn't tasted the pleasure of running a stall and had only ever experienced power abuse. In other words, they just had no zest for life. Putting aside whether these courtiers were right or wrong, it was true that they had saved her a lot of trouble. These memories came rushing to her one after another like a waterfall crashing down from the cliffs, splashing icy sprays when they hit the gravels at the bottom. Since the beginning of time, these so-called tragedies had always come in a hysteria like this, cruelly and heartlessly. The next round of memories was closely linked to the rumor in Su Moi's story. As it turned out, it hadn't been a false statement. It was July 22. Shang Jun's entombment was nearing completion. When night fell, the princess's estate was surrounded. Arania was handcuffed out of her home and brought into the palace. She was charged with regicide. The main prosecutor from the criminal bureau in charge of this case was her mother's younger brother, her uncle. After Shang Jun passed away, it stood to reason that the crown prince would succeed to the throne. However, Crown Prince Xiongli He had never been a respected heir. At this point in time, he was a powerless crown prince who would only become a puppet king, and all the power would fall into the hands of Lady King Hua. Everyone in court knew full well that the criminal bureau's prosecutor was merely Lady King Hua's henchman. In other words, the person who placed these charges on Arania was her own mother, the one who ensnared her was her own mother, and the one who was now obdurately pushing her to her death was also her own mother. On the 7th day after Arania was put under arrest, Lady King Hua deigned to visit her in prison. Her cell was humble. A heap of hay was made into a sleeping mat. Next to the cell door was a small rotting table, on its edge sat a dim oil lamp. In a plain robe, Arania leaned against the table to practice her calligraphy. Outside the cell door was a jailer watching over a brazier. Every time she finished a piece of paper, he would receive it from her and burn it away. Lady Qinghua's floor-length garment swept on the stone staircase of the dark dungeon. When she heard the soft rustling, she gazed up to take a look at her visitor. She raised a brow. "Since you're here to see me, I assume you've taken care of everything in the palace." Her tone was gentle, offering a casual greeting as if they were meeting in the royal garden rather than this prison cell. In her splendid palace clothes, Qinghua stopped 2 paces short of the cell door. The jailer opened the door then stepped down. Arania held a finished parchment in her hand as she continued, "Nothing's the matter in here. At first, I really didn't understand why you had accused me of such charges, but after pondering for a while, I've somewhat figured out the reason." "You've always been smart," Qinghua replied lightly. She dropped her eyes and kept them on her face for a while, then took out a sealed document and a porcelain vial from her sleeve. She hesitated for a moment, then leaned over and placed them onto the old table. "Take a look at this." No emotion could be heard from her voice. It was just like those unfeeling perfunctory responses she gave whenever Arania came to offer her respects. Shown by the hazy candlelight, faint ink strokes emerged on the folded document. Arania spread it out in front of her and schemed across the spirited handwriting on the parchment. Her shadow turned slightly gaunt. Each time she gazed down on the piece of paper, her face turned a little paler. A long while later, she looked up to her mother. Besides looking slightly wan and having a trembling pinky, her expression was otherwise calm. Her lips were still able to curve into a smile as she said, "His Excellency Chen Ye had written this report quite methodically. It's so unlike his usual unconstrained style." As Qinghua regarded her, a sense of pity almost surfaced in her eyes. "Are you comfortable here?" she at last asked. Arania bowed her head in seeming thought. After a length of time, she softly chuckled and gave an irrelevant answer, "My father was a decisive man in all his life. I didn't think he would one day lose to the word love. I reckon he never thought that you are still unable to forget Junyo's father even to this day." Junyo was without a doubt a thorn in his eyes. When he banished her from the capital and ruined her future, he was only doing it for his gratification. Yet he had planted the seeds of his death in doing so. "But mother, you didn't forbear for years just to stop there. Ultimately, your goal is to make Junyo queen and take back what was her father's, am I right?" She gazed to the candle flame and said, "The crown prince, and also Changdi, we are all blocking Junyo's path. Since the crown prince isn't your son, you naturally wouldn't have any mercy for him. Changdi is a simpleton, she has nothing save for her arrogance. Perhaps it would do just fine to break her sanity. The royal family would never let a mad girl become their ruler. But to have 2 heir-apparent daughters both go crazy would surely invite people's gossips. One of us must die. Since you're protecting Changdi, I would have to be the one dead." She forced a smile. "I didn't think you would come to this. Mother, your plan really left no way out for me." The prison was deathly silent. Arania placed the memorial aside, spread out a piece of paper and inked her brush. A drop of ink fell onto the open paper. She lowered her voice, "You asked whether I'm comfortable here. Back then, I had also survived after you abandoned me in the snake pit. This time, you at least remember that I like calligraphy, though you had me imprisoned here and make an exception to prepare paper and ink for me to let me pass time. Then how can I not be comfortable?" A long time passed before King Hua at length said, "You know I'm not the only one in this." The brush in Arania's hand quivered. On the paper was written, "The many changes in this ephemeral existence are but predetermined fate at play." Her script was originally very good, but because of the tremor at the final word, it had lost its elegance. Nevertheless, she held firmly onto her brush. King Hua's eyes paused on her writing as she said in a low voice, "Chen Yi's station has been prestigious from the day he was born. Even the king was mindful of him. He has always been very strong-minded, even as a child. He went as far as wrecking his future in order to save Junyo. And yet the best strategist in these worldly affairs must never head toward his own future prospects. His initial intention was to draw up a long-term plan while in exile, yet you had wanted him for yourself. Did you know that that was precisely what he hated?" She gave her a glance and continued, "Did you just lament your father's sentimentalism and ultimate defeat by the word love? Your father was frighteningly treacherous. I had rather die than live, but the only thing I could do was sticking by his side. But what about you? While you are intelligent, you are far inferior to your father in these matters. Chen Ye was merely trifling with you, but he had made you think it was true love and brought you down to this wretchedness. Isn't this also losing to the word love?" The candle light sparsely spread along the memorial. In the past, this very handwriting had also been on a white stationery, saying he had found a few of her wine jars in the courtyard, asking her if it was made by the brewing method mentioned in her letter or not. Today, it was still the same handwriting, but the words it penned were all absurd. Xiangli Arania is guilty of both regicide and patricide. Her heart is crueler than those of wolves and tigers, her deeds are more wicked than those by jackals and leopards. To the line predetermined fate at play written on top of the rice paper, she added another, this sorrow and grief, this worry and fear, all shall in due course go on their way. She had always comforted herself with these words whenever she came across unbearable pain in the past. After finishing the last character, she put away her brush and lowered her voice, "What do you mean by trifling?" King Hua's eyes seemed even more pitying as she said, "He requested your brother to grant him a marriage." Arania slowly lifted her head. She isn't a woman from any prominent family. But her saving grace is that she is demure and virtuous. She's a teacher at the Imperial Academy. I heard this woman actually came from your estate. She goes by a single character for her name, Tian. Wen Tian, even her name sounds genteel. Arania closed her eyes. A while later, she said, "I feel a little tired. Mother, please leave." King Hua turned, then after 2 steps, looked back and said, "Your case has been settled this morning, the execution is in 3 days. Chen Ye sent this report at noon, requesting His Majesty to move the execution to the shrine. Your going to the shrine is a matter of course, since the shrine has many more punishment instruments compared to the criminal bureau's dungeon. I know even if your soul were turned to ashes, you would never want to receive this humiliation. If you can't bear it, then use the drug in the porcelain vial to end things yourself. As your mother, this is the last compassion I can offer you." After King Hua's figure disappeared from the dim light emitted by the oil lamp, Arania suddenly trembled in a convulsion. A mouthful of blood dyed the white paper and its black words in blots of red. The lamp's small flame uneasily wavered, then finally extinguished. King Hwa's figure stopped at the dungeon door. As it was about to walk on, Arania suddenly spoke from her cell, her voice a hoarseness. Compassion? From you to me. She continued after a fit of coughs. You may also remember that year when Teacher Mo rescued me from the snake pit. The first time I saw you, they said you were my mother. I was really happy to see how beautiful you were. When I saw you heading my way, I ran over for a hug but accidentally fell. You passed by me as if you didn't see me, as if I was a flower, a blade of grass, or a gravel. Your skirt grazed my face. I was knocked over and injured my arm, but you looked straight ahead and walked past me. The rustling sound of fabric sweeping on the ground that day was exactly the same as tonight. King Hwa's fingers held the side of a magnolia. There was another coughing fit. She softly added, I never knew what love was in my entire life. You were stingy with giving it, so I fought for it myself. Now you're destroying it, too. I really don't understand. Why must you be so cruel? Am I your enemy? Does seeing me in pain brings you satisfaction? King Hwa's lips quivered. A long while later, she said, if you reincarnate, I will pay you in our next lives. Arania smiled faintly and said in tiredness, do let our mortal bonds end in this lifetime. If there is another life, I have nothing more to ask. My only wish is to never see you again in existence beyond. Suffocating silence took over the air. King Hwa's footfall drifted further away. They were faintly discernible, but one could hear a hidden turmoil from those seemingly steady footsteps. When King Hwa's figure disappeared into the darkness beyond the prison door, a jailer standing from the distance hurried over to light the lamp. The last scene of this memory fragment showed Arania folding up the bloodied document and slowly lighting the lamp. The flame danced across the blurry bloodstains and burned them away in the blink of an eye. Ashes sprinkled down onto the wooden table, bringing with them little sparkling ember specks. Sumoy had asked if ever she became resentful because of Chen Ye one day, for what reason would it be? At the time, she had joked saying it must be because he was once hers to have. For example, he fell in love with her, then didn't love her anymore and fell for someone else instead. She didn't expect her words would become prophetic one day. He probably never did love her, and even her precious memories were nothing but lies. How clever he had been! She lowered her eyes onto her injured fingers that had been licked by the flames. A while later, she said to herself, would you be able to vent if you saw how I look today, Chen Ye? A long time passed when she added, but you know, for me, this revenge is a bit too cruel. The oil lamp cast her reflection on the dark stone wall, dignified, but so very gaunt. Life's twists and turns never go as we want. They didn't go according to Arania's hopes, and neither did they go according to King Hwa's. Arania was snatched away one day before she was transferred to Qinan Palace. Behind Qinan Mountain, the weather was mild. The sun shone down warm rays. Twittering of birds chirped out from the woods from time to time. Not far from there, the Quinyan beast from the stone forest was peacefully sunbathing with his belly up. All was calm and peaceful, as if the vicissitudes outside this mountain were all parts of this impermanent life's fun and games. Fengju saw a white-robed man sitting on a boulder reasoning with Arania, but she didn't recognize who he was. His black hair was casually tied under his hat, his face was cool and nonchalant, his demeanor was rather insouciant, in his hand was a stick made from a maize stem, and he seemed as though he could not wait to knock the stick straight at Arania's head. "What is left in that palace for you to miss at this point? I finally managed to rescue you, but you cannot wait to go back. Don't tell me it's for Chen yet." At this junction, he slightly pondered and rapped his maize stick onto the boulder. "No, you're not the type that would still hang on to him even till now. What exactly do you want to descend the mountain for?" Next to the boulder were two verdant ancient trees. Sturdy vines climbing on them made for a cool bed. Arania sat and gazed to the distant scenery beyond the forest as she said, "There's one thing you always say, the ephemeral world and its fleeting life are but an experience. I think that makes a lot of sense. Many experiences equal a long life, fewer experiences equal a short life. I recently realized that my life may seem short, but it could be considered rather long." She paused, then continued, "If there's anyone for me to miss in the palace, perhaps it's just my brother. He's a pushover. In truth, he has no ambition for the throne. This war with the Owl clan is no accident. It's undoubtedly my MO. Lady Qinghua's ruse. She intends to use someone else's blade to permanently eliminate him. Being a kind-hearted person, my brother won't be able to defend against the enemy. Once on the battlefield, he will never come back alive." The man in white frowned. "Even though Xiangli he treated you well, this is his fate to bear. Can you actually protect his life considering the situation? You've just gotten out of the vortex yourself, why jump back into it? If you know my personality," Arania unhurriedly told him, "then you should know I wouldn't turn a blind eye and abandon my brother. I will go to the battlefield and change places with him. At that time, I'll need you to also stay on the lookout. Don't worry, I cherish my life very much. I'll weigh my decisions carefully. Compared to my brother, I won't be met with dead ends everywhere, and I'll have my chances at surviving." Seeing the white-robed man's gloomy face, she laughed and said, "I haven't seen this expression of yours too often. Fortunately, there aren't too many people who treat me well in this life. You and Teacher Mo aren't as unlucky as my brother, so you don't need me to make such a risky rescue." The man in white regarded her for a moment and said, "You've always been so stubborn. I know I can't stop you no matter what I say, but the battlefield is a dangerous place. What if you don't come back from this trip?" She was calm. "If I didn't come back from this trip, even if I died, I would be killed in battle in the name of my brother. Compared to Lady Qinghua's forcing me to commit suicide, this way of dying is much more meaningful. By that time, will you take the trouble to change my brother's name and bring him to a safe place so that he can live an ordinary life?" After a while, she added, "I had written 20 letters to Chen yet. Please also help me take them back. It would be somewhat laughable to leave the sincerities in those letters with him." The man in white sighed. "I'll remember the things you've entrusted to me. I just hope I won't actually have to carry them out when the time comes. When are you heading down?" She lay on the cool vine bed and used her arms as a pillow, her lips showing a little smile. "The breeze is nice, the sun is mild. Today is a day to sleep. Let me steal half a day of bliss for now." This paradisaical scene behind Qinan Mountain gradually faded into the thin sunset. Fengju repressed her heavy heart as she tried to open the last stretch of memory. If we were to talk of folktales, her Aunt Bai Qian had an infinite collection. Due to the prolonged exposure since she was little, she had read quite a few of them. She didn't even know how many of those tearjerkers she had read, but none could be compared to the story before her eyes. This memory didn't have a single drop of tear. Instead, it was a sublime blade that was both terribly cold and terribly heavy. When it took away a person's life, it was unhesitatingly swift. Arania's injury had been very quiet, her pain had been very quiet, and even her death had been very quiet. According to Sumoy, Xiangli he was recorded in the annals to have personally gone off to war and driven out the enemy for 17 days. But since his force wasn't strong enough, he ultimately perished on the battlefield. In the memory, Fengju was able to see the truth that was masked behind the thin pages of history. Dying in battle wasn't Xiangli he, it was Arania. The war with the Owl clan was caused by the Bianiao's condoning of transboundary hunting. The war between the two clans, then, naturally happened on the borderline where the Sicing River ceaselessly flowed to the south round the Pingyun mountain pass, year after year, into the Sibai Sea. The section of the Sicing River by the Pingyun mountain and Sibai Sea had always been known as the southern Sicing. Beside it sat a large musical forest abounded with musical trees. Since antiquity, this forest had been used by the Bianiaos and the Owls as the boundary between the two kingdoms. Arania rushed to the battlefield on August 7. It had only been 6 days since the war erupted, but the Bianiao clan had already lost a large tract of land and was forced to retreat to the south of the Sicing. An army of 80,000 strong had suffered a loss of 30,000. The remaining 50,000 soldiers were presently trying to impede the advancement of the Owl clan's 120,000 strong army from the other side of the river. Military orders requesting for reinforcements were expedited one after another to the imperial city. King Hua turned a deaf ear and remained immobile. In front of them was a powerful army, behind them was no helping hand. Army morale slumped dramatically. They already looked completely defeated before they even stepped onto the battlefield. That night, Arania snuck into the army base and knocked Xiangli he unconscious. She had him transported out of the army, put his armor on, and took over the commander's tent. Arania led 50,000 weary soldiers and pushed the Owl clan beyond the river with the advantage of the semicircular formation of the river. On the Sicing, blood drifted along the oars, dead corpses lined the south bank. It was late summer, and at night, cool breeze blew across the riverside, but one could only smell rotting corpses and the stench of blood. The semicircular formation thwarted the enemy for 7 days, taking from the Owl clan 50,000 soldiers. Even so, due to prolonged insufficient food supply and lack of reinforcements, it could not withstand the Owl clan's repeated attacks thanks to their sheer number. Finally at midnight on the 7th day, the formation was broken at its first lapse of defense. Venus was bright in the night sky. Ecstatic, the oldest prince of the Owl clan was about to send his troops across the river. Under the starry sky in the purview on the other side of the stream, an iron bow the height of a man suddenly materialized from the commander's hand. 3 wingless arrows carried biting wind with them and pierced across the night sky. They plunged straight into the stream, turning into 3 colossal iron pillars that lined across the raging current. The Soul Evocation Formation. Venus was wrapped away by the suddenly darkening clouds. A mass of golden light fiercely burst forth from the slender body next to the towering iron bow. After shooting to the sky, the golden light formed into a giant biennial, majestically hovering over the riverfront. Its wings fanned bouts of gale, sweeping the armored cavalry off their feet. The figure beside the iron bow still hadn't moved. Lashing gale knocked away his helmet, revealing long raven tresses, then a cold beautiful face. Amid distressing neighing, the golden biennial perched atop an iron pillar in the middle of the river, its wingspan spreading across the better part of the stream. It flapped its wings again as its entire body erupted into flames. The strong flames went ablaze like an interminable fire, blocking the entire Sicene River and forming a natural barrier from the enemy. Scorching wind set the musical forest chiming. The musical trees were called such because their leaves and boughs made musical sounds with the blowing of wind. To block the enemy beyond the Sicene River, Urania had resorted to the soul evocation sorcery and incinerated her own soul. This was what had really disintegrated her soul, the reason her existence had turned into ashes. The sky was inky. Fire continued to rage on the rushing river. The biennial's cries echoed through the forest, mesmerizing songs rang out from the musical trees. They sounded like a requiem mourning the death of a princess. Unafraid of the scorching wind, the tiny white musical flowers braved through the flame on the smoky river like migratory birds, scattering down like descending snow. There was a particularly persistent one that slowly drifted down onto Urania's hair. She raised her hand and brought it to her ear, her fingers briefly brushing her temple, then stopped. It was what Chenya had done each time he gave her a flower. She was lost in thought. Then a long while later, she smiled to herself. The golden biennial cried its last as she stroked the white flower on her hair and slowly closed her eyes. The giant bird on the river froze into a statue. Only the flames did not cease. The long-haired princess was leaning on her iron bow, her life completely depleted as she entered into an eternity of empty void. The fire did not die until 3 days later. When it finally extinguished, the princess and her iron bow had been turned to dust, dissolving in the rolling current. This had been Urania's life. Fengju still couldn't figure out what Urania was thinking when she smiled for the last time. When she returned from the memory, in front of her was a tall-looking glass covered under heavy snowfall. Fengju reached her hand out toward it when all of a sudden she was met with darkness. At the moment she lost consciousness, she thought to herself that she had finally managed to pass out. It would have been great if she could faint like this sooner. End of chapter 14.